So while Karen is joining us, Karen is a narrative strategist and the real pioneer in the field, co-author of Business Storytelling for Dummies, a great book that taught me personally a lot about story. And Karen is going to take us through critical mindsets and skills for successful CSOs. Hello,
Hey,
lovely to
Artem.
see you.
Hey, how are you? This is an adventure.
It is, it definitely is. Are you connected from your phone?
Yes, I connected from my phone. I lost internet access this morning. We don't know why. It's not getting fixed. So here I am.
Oh, I hope it stays stable. So let me know like when to shift the slides because it's
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it's not done through the phone, but I'm here for you during
Right.
your whole talk. Let's have our
Great.
fires for Karen for joining despite the technical difficulties. So I'm off the air and thank you so much for being with us.
All right, great. Well, welcome everyone. And, my presentation today is the role of Chief Storyteller, what it is, how to do it really well. And basically, if you want to be a Chief Storyteller, there are a lot of opportunities, more opportunities for them today than ever before. And so this talk is, again, sort of how to be more successful in that role. So let's go to the next slide. Great. Here's a little bit about me. I'm one of the pioneers in the field of business storytelling and the author of the best-selling book, Business Storytelling for Dummies. I still run across people today who've said, oh, it's been a Bible for them on how to really work with narrative in organizations. I'm also a TEDx speaker, and the links are how to reach me if you would like to chat a little bit further. And let's see. Well, I've worked with everything from Fortune 500 companies down to entrepreneurs. So I've basically seen it all and almost done it all. So, and I'm really happy that so many of my colleagues are here at Artem's conference. All right, next slide. Now, I have these slides that you'll be able to see on the recording. And if you want a copy of the slides just as a PowerPoint or PDF, just connect with me and by email and I'll send them to you. So these are designed as leave behinds. So I'm not really going to read everything, but I think it's important first to focus on definitions. So, like, what is the definition of a chief storyteller? We know definitions of narrative, but what about chief storyteller? So here are two definitions. And the first one is, from a consultancy, and it's about communicating the right messages to the public and quite literally telling the company's story. And the second one says basically the same thing, is that chief storytellers are responsible for crafting the story and making it stick across all forms of communication to ensure that someone thinks of your brand, they're recalling a narrative that's engaging, another consulting company. So what's the focus here of these two definitions? Because I have other definitions I want to share with you. And if you put something in the chat, that would be great. And for me, the key distinction of both of these definitions is that there is this idea that there is one story for an organization, the overall arching narrative. And I think actually that's a mistake to think in that way. Marketing and sales and branding is one slice of organizational life. But in my view, it's somewhat limited to just focus on that kind of narrative. So, Artem, let's go to the next slide. All right, so this slide, what's the focus here? What's the difference here between the first two definitions and these two definitions? Well, It's helping organizations and leaders refine their communication, strengthen cultural alignment, and inspire action through a clear and authentic narrative. That's much more strategic than simply the brand story. And brand storytelling is important. I don't want to, say it's not. I just think there's a bigger picture here. So in theory, the chief storyteller is responsible for creating harmony between internal messaging and external sales and marketing, and the work the teams actually create. So the chief storytelling officer has responsibilities that go far beyond brand marketing, touching upon a new way of leading in the future of work as businesses everywhere respond to innovation, change, and volatility. That, for me, is a much more complete definition. And what I'm going to talk about during this presentation is even expanding that a little bit more. So let's continue, Artem. Great. Both of the second definitions really focused and attended to culture. And I like what McKinsey & Company says, culture can be a true competitive advantage when it's intentional and a significant drag on performance when it is not. And so I think of chief storytellers as actually culture tenders. And brand narrative is a part of that. But the tricky point with a brand narrative is, does it really reflect the culture of what's going on in an organization? You can have an internal story that's different from the external story. It's not a match. And the company ends up being inauthentic, and we'll eventually get caught out in that. So why not have both the brand narrative and the internal narratives of the organization reflect each other? So let's move on. Artem, you're doing a great job here. Thank you. So why is a chief storyteller important? Because it's matching both internal and external of the company, right? Internal culture, external messaging. And I've worked with companies exactly on matching those two. So it's important because of alignment that is generated within the organization, engagement. I can't tell you how narrative can be a powerful engagement experience. It improves productivity. Trust is built and connection is built. Inspiration happens both with customers and with employees. Motivation is one of the byproducts. Knowledge transfer is incredibly important as a KPI, a key performance indicator. It addresses the core identity of the organization. It influences hiring, and it's basically the secret sauce that differentiates you from everyone else in the marketplace. All right, Artem, next slide. So what does a chief storyteller do? There are basically three big buckets that a chief storyteller attends to. One is a diagnostic, right? The chief storyteller is at the center of a vast interconnected web of stories that link all stakeholders together. The strength of that web diagnoses the strength and health of that culture. So I always love using narrative as a diagnostic tool to understand more about what makes that particular company tick. How strong is their culture? Are there areas that have frayed? Or are they well connected? Is it like a strong woven cloth, right? And these three big buckets of storytelling actually was written about by Ella Saltmarsh in this article at the bottom of the page, Using Story to Change Systems at the Stanford Social Innovation Review in 2018. And it is a brilliant, brilliant article, and I recommend everybody reading it. The second bucket of activity is finding stories. That's listening for known stories, hidden stories, partial stories, broken stories, and unearthing unearthing and shining the light on unexpected stories, insights, and connections. So story narrative, and storytelling and narrative is operating as a light in this particular bucket. And then the third bucket is sharing, for sharing stories, for connection, pride, and innovation. This is the glue that holds everybody together, both customers and employees, right? And which stories showcase the extraordinary accomplishments of our customers because of our product or service? Which stories showcase the extraordinary abilities of our vendors? Which stories internally break down silos, build pride, generate trust and connection, and transfer knowledge? Which stories unite us so we can inspire new and innovative values? So that's the glue. And I hope these three buckets sort of start building insights for you about the importance of the Chief Storytelling Officer role and how that person can be both effective in an organization, but also incredibly valuable. All right, let's go forward, Artem. So this is just like brainstorming a little slide here. Like, who could be chief storytellers? There are so many opportunities for chief storytellers in an organization, right? Is it the leadership? It could be. Is it the executive team? It could be, but I don't think so. They're a part of the story. It could be someone in learning development or organizational improvement. It could be somebody in leadership development. It could be in marketing, as long as they have a bigger view of what the world of story is in their organization. It could be somebody who is head of customer relations and vendor relations. So there are many it could even be the CFO. And I've coached CFOs in this role, and it also could be head of HR. But there are plenty of opportunities for who could be chief storytellers. Now, who should be chief storytellers? You know, it could be. Well, I think it does need to be a dedicated position. Because unless you have an understanding that we're calling you our organizational development specialist, but your primary job is working with narratives, right? So I think that who should be chief storytellers are many talented people who have a solid grounding in narrative and a solid grounding in organizational life and organizational culture and also customer relations. So I hope this makes sense. And I can't really see the chat very well on my phone, so I'm not sure what you've put in there. But Artem, if you see anything that is great to share, please do so. And we either at the end or now. So I'll let you choose.
So far, Cecilia is saying that this way of defining the role and the importance of CSO is very compelling. And we had a lot of fires raging during your talk. So doing great.
Okay, good. Thanks. I appreciate the feedback, everyone. All right, let's keep going, Artem. All right, so let's dig into what are the essential skills for the chief storyteller to be successful. So let's move forward again, Artem. Now, there's two sides of storytelling, crafting and telling. And I don't like the word storytelling, never have, for the 40 years I've been involved in storytelling, because it builds a picture in our mind of somebody telling somebody something else, telling. Also, in the definitions that we saw earlier, there was a focus on crafting, right? Well, sure, you need to know how to craft a story. So yes, storytelling is crafting and telling. Yes and no. So let's go to the next slide and see what else it is. Better way to think about the CSO position is ongoing listening, finding, polishing, and sharing. We live in such a vast network of stories in organizational life, with vendors, with customers. You will never, how do I want to say, you'll never be at a loss for having material, right? And it's this ongoing listening, finding, polishing, and sharing, right, that is the true cycle of narrative work for a CSO, so that you can leverage that web, make it stronger, be the light that shines on areas of the organization that have been forgotten, to build connection and to strengthen the glue that holds us all together. So let's continue, Artem. Here are 6 story disciplines of a CSO, right? And I've labeled them 1 through 5. They all kind of happen concurrently, but we'll just go around the circle. So again, you're doing these disciplines for internal and external trust, relationships, engagement, loyalty, advocacy, impact, memorability, word-of-mouth marketing, and business growth. So the first one is attention and skill building on just what narrative is and how to really work with it really, really well. So that means more training in narrative skills. And that's not just telling and crafting. It's essential that you build great listening skills. There's also being audience-centric, right? What I mean by that is that who's your audience? And you craft a story for your audience. The audience is also a co-creation, right? That experience between the teller and the listener, between the audience, whoever that audience is, employees, vendors, customers, it is a co-created experience. And you must always continue to focus on who that audience is and the stories that they need to hear. You're also bringing experience design into the equation. Storytelling is an experience. So we want to get better at designing those stories to deliver phenomenal experiences or great experiences. Now, those experiences can be small, they can be large, right? But when we start adding an experience design into the mix, we get better at storytelling and narrative. Number 4 is also strategy and culture. Strategy doesn't come alive in an organization unless there are narratives about it. And that also touches on the culture of the organization. So strategy and culture tending is a big part of the CSO's life. There's also measurement. How do you link storytelling to key performance indicators in an organization? Because if you can't measure what's happening, then how can you track it? And how do you know if you're being successful, right? So measurement is important. And I always like to ask clients, what are your KPIs and how can we connect to those key performance indicators, connect narrative to that so we know we're doing well. And then the last one is governance. And governance is, well, what are the policies and the procedures and the methodologies that we're using to work with narrative in an organization? And one of the things I talk about that Lori Silverman and I, she's my co-author, talk about in Business Storytelling for Dummies is there are different approaches and different methodologies to use in different parts of the organization. And so we go through those places of difference and articulate what those methodologies and approaches are. So that will help inform the governance that the organization is working on around narrative. All right, next, Artem. So when people feel listened to, you ask reflective questions that allows them and yourself to go deeper into the meaning behind the story, and you offer appreciation, like, wow, what an amazing story. I really like how you said this and that and the other thing. People feel seen, heard, valued, and empowered, right? And there's no greater experience on earth than feeling seen, heard, and valued, and that's what every human being wants. The outcomes are generative conversations, which means that you continue to move the organization forward. And then the ethics is a part of this. We're going to talk about ethics. And then again, as I said, linked to KPIs and additional measurement tools. All right, next. All right, so here's the listening piece. And you're going to want to use story prompts. Tell me about a time when, tell me what happened when. You want experiences. You don't want opinions or thoughts. You want that actual experience. And you get to just listen delightedly, absorbing what's being said. Don't interrupt. Give that person your full attention. And then put all that internal chatter that's going on your head in your head on hold. Just be there 100% for that person. Next. Now, there are two kinds of questions in the world, information questions and reflective questions. Everybody usually asks information questions because that's what we're designed to do. But reflective questions allow everyone in the experience to go deeper into the story. So here I have a whole slide for you of these reflective questions. And as you're listening to a story, just pick 2 or 3 of these reflective questions. You don't have to go through the whole list, but this list gives you a lot of flexibility to pick and choose questions that are going to really bring out the point of the story, the lessons of the story, what's really working in the story, things of that sort. So again, this is why I'm going to leave this behind for you. This whole PowerPoint is a PDF, so you have these tools with you. All right, next. And then appreciations. Everybody in an organization focuses on problems, and let's solve the problem. But very few people do a good job in appreciating what they heard, what they value in the story, what they like about the story. And when you give positive reinforcement, that you get more positivity. And I could go on into the neuroscience of storytelling and give you all of the studies that demonstrate this to be true. It is the foundation of a whole methodology of appreciative inquiry. And then once you give appreciation so that you get more of what is going great, then you thank the teller for his or her story, and you ask them if if they can retell the story, record it, polish it, etc. Because again, this is a co-created experience, and they own the story, not you, and not the organization. So this is the 3-step process for tellers to feel seen, heard, and valued. And it's an amazing, powerful experience. All right, next, Artem. So generative conversations, what the heck are these and how do you spark them? Let's go to the next slide, Artem. All right, this is based on Conversational Intelligence, a book that was written by, oh my gosh, I'll have to run over to my bookshelf to get that for you. But just Google conversational intelligence. This is based on 25 years of work in organizations. And it basically says, yeah, you know, if I'm just telling you what to do, it's directive and there's not much trust. And your response is the person receiving that directive is going to be to protect what you have. Then there's something that moves into a level 2, which is often what we do when we share PowerPoints back and forth that are narrative based so that I can, you know, convince you to give me resources and maybe we can do some sharing back and forth around those resources. And that happens all the time in organizations, but it's based on conditional trust. You're advocating and inquiring, but it's still sort of a wait and see. And the relationships are qualified. In other words, that means they're not just those powerful kinds of relationships where you feel connected and deeply connected, as what usually happens when you're working with narrative, but it's sort of qualified. I'll give you this, you'll give me that, and it's a negotiation. Now, the highest form of conversation in an organization is storytelling, narrative. And where you have a dialogue, you're sharing stories back and forth. Let's have a dialogue so we can share stories, learn more, and gain amazing insights. And Conversational Intelligence, the book, has several chapters on this level 3 of conversation. However, she just says that narrative is the way to do it, but doesn't tell you how to do it. So hopefully what I've done so far is to share with you some of the tools and skills for narrative so that you can spark these level 3 conversations wherever you go as a CSO. And check out the book because there's a lot more to that book, but this is just a quick snapshot. Okay, onward, Artem. All right. This is more about conversational intelligence and narrative intelligence and the skills to build. The art of listening, asking the question, appreciation, reflection, co-creation, humanizing conversations, aspiring conversations and narratives, generative conversations, and aligning conversations and narratives. So closing the gaps between reality and aspirations. I'll let you contemplate this. If anybody has any questions more about any of these skills, please email me and I'm happy to help you out. Okay, next. So can we really do conversational intelligence and narrative intelligence? Well, neuroscientists demonstrate that level 3 conversations, that's storytelling, is hardwired into all human beings. But most environments do not encourage this capacity in us, so that's your role as a chief storytelling officer. Level 3 can be cultivated. Narrative space, narrative conversations, narrative sharing back and forth can be cultivated. And when we practice both with others, we raise ourselves, relationships, teams, and organizations. All right, let's go. Next slide. I have 2 slides here on ethics. And I think the main point here, you can read all of these on your own. It's pretty clear, I think. This was developed way back, in the early 2000s when the field was just getting started and there was a lot of movement, but unethical things were happening, right? And so a few of us came up with the ethical statements, and so this is a combination of all of those. So who owns the story? They do, not you, not the organization, right? There also needs to be rewards and acknowledgments for the story. You're using somebody else's story, and you want to avoid that sense of being used. And allow people to tell their story in its context. And that you should also know that no story is innocent, so you need to choose your stories wisely. You want to respect the people in your stories. And storytelling rights should be given to everyone in the organization, not just to the leaders, human resources, marketers, or public relations group. Everybody has the right to tell their own story. Next. No one has the full story, and no single story can ever capture or do justice to the fullness of life. So look for stories that are not being told and share those also. And this number 12, it is unethical during times of change when there is often a story void, not to provide guiding and future stories. People deprived of guiding and future stories during periods of change are adrift with anxiety and uncertainty. And it's unethical to deliberately put people in that position. Do not assume you know someone else's story or try to impose your interpretation of their story on them. Receive permission to tell someone else's story. Acknowledge your interpretation of the story. Be able to tell the story in front of the people most affected by it, and the teller also. Always credit the source of the story. And because stories have such power, it is imperative CEOs be well trained in both oral storytelling and written stories. All right, so that's the list. We ran through that list, but there it is. All right, next, Artem. Now, looking for outcomes of stories and their impacts and how to measure them is tricky sometimes. But if you want the guide, for how to do that, then it lists all the individual and organizational outcomes, their impacts, and how to measure culture work for CSOs. So go grab that document if you'd like it, and I hope it proves helpful for you. But that's often a mystery, right, left in the CSO role. Like, how do you actually do that? Well, this is going to help you a lot, I believe. All right, next. So what are the core stories a chief storyteller nurtures and promotes? Let's go to the next slide, Artem. So here are the 7 core stories. There are more, right? Hundreds of different types of stories in an organization. But if we want to put them into buckets, here's how it goes. Our vision of the future, the why of the strategy, my commitment. Here's my commitment to seeing this through. Here's my commitment as your chief storytelling officer. You need to communicate that in every storytelling session that you have, right? Not everyone, but enough. Stakeholder stories of customers, staff, and vendors. Any story about overcoming obstacles and perseverance, or course corrections. Oh, we made a mistake. Here's how we fixed it. About the founding and history of the organization. So those are 7 large buckets that also are part of the culture. Now, I forgot to tell you that I'm a folklorist, and folklore, basically, folklorists know the guts of what makes up a culture. Narrative was one of those guts, right? And so that's why I'm so keyed in onto the culture equation for CSOs, because it's going to make you more successful, right? So that's just an FYI. All right, next. So what are your next steps? Where do you think you need to go? And what information have I presented to you that, excuse me, my throat's going dry. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. And what I've presented to you, where do you need to strengthen your skills? Where do you feel like you could excel really well? So, what are your next steps? Maybe it's listening to more of the conversations in the conference here that Artem has put together. There are other conferences that Artem has done chock full of additional information about working with narrative and organization. So maybe it's more of that. But I hope I've sort of inspired you and also sort of tickled your mind about what's possible and where you could possibly go and how you could actually operate in a CSO role. Okay, thanks, Artem. Next. All right, here again is how to reach me. And I'm on LinkedIn also, my email, my website. So go ahead and reach out for any help that you need. And Artem, I think that's it. Is there one more slide? Nope, that's it.
Thank you so much. It was so packed with different aspects of it. For me personally, this map with 6 applications with the arrows really stood out. And level of communications. Thank you so much. I left all the links in the chat, and we actually have one question coming up. Could you please share your opinion on what the main job of CSO is right now? And the follow-up question, could you please read to us one of your most curious folklore discoveries?
That's great. So I think the bottom line for me, the chief storyteller's role is to strengthen the connections between all different parts of the organization. And that includes vendors and that includes customers, right? It's all one big bucket. And when you get excited about, oh, let's hear the stories from our vendors about what makes them so great. Why did we choose these vendors? Of all the vendors in the world, why these vendors? And present those vendors to your customers. All of a sudden, your customers have a much greater appreciation of your products and services. When you're able to take an internal story from one of the areas of an organization, operations, let's say, right? And you bring that out to your customers and share that with them, all your customers are going, woohoo, this is really great. And then asking your customers, tell us your experiences of our products and services, and then reflecting that back into the organization builds such pride, right, among people. So why would you not want to do that kind of work? And you get to be inspired every day by all the stories that you hear. So, and then the question about, as a folklorist, sort of one of the discoveries, that have happened for me. Well, in the early days, I would go in and use narrative as a diagnostic tool. I would do story archaeologies, right, for the organization. I would listen to as many stories as I could and use that to diagnose the health and culture of the organization. Like when there are silos in an organization, and one silo knows a part of the story, a different silo knows a different part of the story, but no one knows the whole story. Right? I get to be the translator and the person who brings together those stories. And then what happens? Both silos go, oh, we're connected. I now have a relationship with you. You're not somebody over on the other side of the organization who makes me cranky, right? And so I think that is incredibly valuable. And I was always so thrilled to be able to help in that capacity and to build capacity in the organizations as a result.
That's lovely, Karen. Thank you so much. And I will take this answer of yours as, if I may, as a reply to the traditional question of this one area where stories should be applied. So if I understood correctly, strengthening the connections in the organization between different people and groups. Right.
Yes,
awesome.
Yes. Think of it as that web, that light, and that glue. And that model is incredibly powerful.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Karen. All these fires that are raging right now are for you. Let's share these with Karen. And we have a couple of more questions if it's comfortable for you to stay in the chat and reply to Cecilia
absolutely.
and Adel. That would be lovely. Thank you so much for joining us. It's practical as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolutely. Happy to answer questions.